Hi everyone, my name is Isla and I am a student of Miss Ramans at St. Louis University, and I was so looking forward to coming into the classroom this semester and go ahead and teach you guys a little bit about bacteria and viruses, but unfortunately that's not the case, so I'm here virtually and today we're going to be talking about viruses and bacteria, and I thought it was a good time for us to kind of learn about bacteria and viruses because of everything that's happening on in the world right now. It'll help you guys understand a little bit better about what it is, how to take care of it, and all this kind of stuff. So we're going to go ahead and go right into it. Okay, so today's lesson is kind of separated into three main parts. The first part, we're kind of going to do a pre-survey. It's not really a grade. I just want you guys to read the question and kind of see what topics we're going to cover today and what you already know. And then at the end, you're going to see how much you learned actually in your growth. So we'll do the pre-quiz at the beginning, and then we'll do the same quiz with the same questions and the same answers at the end. And it's not for me or for your teacher, it's just for you to see what things you learned throughout today's lesson. And then the whole center of the lesson is going to be covering bacteria and viruses, and it's going to be what bacteria and what viruses are, what kind of types there are, what's their characteristics, how they transfer from person to person, and then any cures. And then at the end, we're going to be doing a little bit of a project. We're going to start with the pre-quiz, and if you prefer to be read to, I will be reading the questions and the options, but you could also just pause the video, answer the questions, and move on to the next slide, answer the questions, and then once you do the 6 questions, then pick back up and start listening again. But I will read it for those who like to be read to. So go ahead and just grab any plain piece of paper and something to write with, and just quickly jot down your answers, like number it 1 through 6, write down your answers, just so that you have something to look back on once we actually do the lesson and you take the post-quiz or survey, whatever you want to call it. You can see what kind of things you learned throughout the however long this lesson lasts. So we'll go ahead and start with number 1. Bacteria is A, not able to pass from one person to another. B, a cell that has a nucleus. C, is the common cold. D, a living organism. Number 2, viruses are A, a non-living organism that attacks the host. B, a living organism that attacks the host. C, killed with antibiotics. D, larger than bacteria. And like I said, feel free to pause in between the questions if you need a little bit more time. Number 3, bacteria is good and bad for humans. A, true, or B, false. Number 4, there is a cure for both bacteria and viruses. A, true, B, false. Number 5, how do bacteria and viruses go from host to host, from person to person? And lastly, 6, how are bacteria and viruses different? Give 2 examples. So now you kind of got a little bit of an idea of what kind of things we will be covering today and what kind of questions you will hopefully be able to answer at the end of this lesson. So to start off, we're going to separate the 2 main categories, which are bacteria and viruses. And so there's really complex definitions for both. And I did add them to the screen, but I wanted us to simplify it so that it's super easy for you guys to understand. So a bacteria is, if you look at the very fancy definition, a member of a large group of unicellular microorganisms which have cell walls but lack organelles and an organized nucleus, including some of which can cause disease. So basically, it's an organism that is both good and bad for humans. And then a virus is an infective agent that typically consists of a nucleic acid molecule in a protein coat. And it's also way too small to be seen by a light microscope, and it is able to multiply multiple times. So if there's 1, it can multiply in 2, 2 multiplies in a bunch. So it keeps on going like that. So basically, it's an infective agent that causes sickness. On this slide, I've outlined exactly bacteria and viruses, and then across from one another is the complete differences. So for example, bacteria is living, whereas viruses are non-living. So if you just go down the list, bacteria are rigid, so they have super kind of wavy size when you look at it through a microscope, and then viruses are very spiky, so they kind of have spike-like structures. Bacteria have antibiotics that we can use in order to help it, and viruses have no cures. And we'll talk a little bit about vaccines later, so because viruses and vaccines go hand in hand. Bacteria are bigger than viruses, and viruses are smaller than bacteria. So if you just think about, viruses are really, really, really tiny, and they're a lot scarier than bacteria. And then bacteria can also be good and bad. So there are lots of good and lots of bad bacteria out there, and our bodies naturally produce a lot of good and healthy bacteria that we will go into on the next few slides. And then viruses are not so good for humans. They can make us very sick because they are infective agents. So some sicknesses that bacteria and viruses cause separately and both together are laid out kind of on this Venn diagram area. And some things that go along with bacteria are strep throat. If you've ever had it, it's like nasty white stuff in the back of your throat. It causes your throat to hurt really bad, and super bad coughs. Also causes tuberculosis, which is a really bad kind of a cough, and whooping cough, which is something that young kids really have. It also is like a really bad sounding kind of a cough. And then, are antibiotics able to be used? Yes. So if you've ever had strep throat, your doctor has most likely 100% prescribed an antibiotic to treat the strep throat and to get it out of your system. Whereas a virus, there is no such thing as an antibiotic that can be taken in order to get rid of the virus itself. So a very common virus actually that a lot of people have had is just the common cold. There's no antibiotic or vaccine that can help us stop the common cold. It is just something that changes every year, and a lot of people get it, as well as the flu. The flu is also something that there are vaccines available, but there's no antibiotics that you take. So if you've ever had the flu, you've gotten some kind of medication to help you with symptoms. So like if you have a cough, you've gotten cough medication, but there's nothing that cures the flu in and of itself. And also just a simple sore throat. There is no antibiotic that you can take to kill a virus. So now we're going to go into 3 main types of bacteria that are found, and they're all classified by their shape for bacteria. So whatever kind of shape they're on, that's how the bacteria is classified. So what it looks like under a microscope, it goes into a specific classification. And usually if you look at very scientific names of certain things that we have, like strep throat, it will use the shape of the bacteria inside the name. So it's not strep throat. There's actually a very scientific name that I don't know how to say, but I'll put it on the screen. And so it has the word of what its shape is, so that people and scientists can identify what categories bacteria lie under. So the 3 main kind are right here on the screen. They're rod-like, circular-like, or like sphere-like, and then a spiral, which is kind of like a wavy kind of a thing. So for the rod-like, there's bacilli, I believe, and that is an example of that is pneumonia. So if you guys have ever heard of pneumonia, it is a type of bacteria that is found in the lungs, and it causes like water and mucus to be inside the lungs. So that is pneumonia. And when you look at it under a microscope, it looks like the bacilli picture right there. And then the spiral ones are more common in herd and sheep and cows and stuff like that, and it's usually worms that are found in their stomachs. Some can be good and some can be bad, but that is a shape that's more common in animals than it is in humans. And then cocci is a circular shape, and like I said earlier, strep throat is an example of it. So if you look at strep throat, the bacteria that's like in your throat, if you put it under a microscope on a dish, it would come up as little circles. One of the main questions that people like to ask themselves when it comes to bacteria is if it's good or bad, and honestly, it is both. There are certain bacteria that are really good for us, and there are certain bacteria that are really bad for us. So there's a lot of super scientific names that you do not have to know or memorize, but I did put them on the screen and also a picture of them, what they look like under the microscope, just to kind of show you a little bit about what they do and whether they fall into the category of good or bad. So if you go ahead and look at the good bacteria side, there's 3 right there. The only one I know how to say properly is E. coli. But there's 3, and the first one at the top is the orange one that has rod shapes. And it is a bacteria that is found in our gut, so like in this area, in your stomach area. And what it does is that it regulates other levels of bacteria in the gut. So it makes sure that there's not a certain amount of bad bacteria in there, and it makes sure that there's still good amounts of good bacteria in your stomach. It also is a bacteria that is found to prevent tumors and also produces lots of vitamins that your body needs. So like I said, bacteria might seem like, when someone says bacteria is like really bad and has a negative connotation to it, it's not. There's a lot of positives that come with it. The middle one also is a rod-like shape, and it produces vitamins and nutrients, boosts your immunity, which is exactly what we need right now, and it also protects against cancer cells. And then E. coli helps in the gut, and it produces a special vitamin called K2, something that our bodies need, but certain strains can lead to illness. So this one can also be good or bad. And then there's bacteria that's just plain bad for us. So the first one is human disease, and it causes human disease, and it comes from contaminated food. So if you have something that's very, very expired or not cleaned properly, or someone doesn't wash their hands when they prepare it, or water that's been contaminated, you can get really sick. So for example, when I went to a trip to Nicaragua, we weren't allowed to drink their water because it would cause a specific kind of bacteria, parasites, to grow in our stomach because our organism wasn't able to process water naturally like theirs does. And then another infectious bacteria, bad bacteria, that can happen are infections that occur after surgery. So if you've ever had surgery and then an infection occurs, it's usually this one. And then the last one on the list occurs when, if you have a bacteria like strep throat, and then you take antibiotics, and then the antibiotics don't work, or you don't finish the antibiotics, the bacteria can get worse and have an infection, and that also is one of those. So yes, bacteria can be both good and bad, so it just depends on what kind of bacteria you're talking about. Just talking a little bit about where bacteria lives, how it's even made, how it comes about, and how it goes from person to person is going to be our next topic to cover. So bacteria lives literally everywhere. It lives in humans, it lives in animals, it lives on the earth, in the grass, in the soil, in oceans, anywhere you can think of, bacteria is probably found there. But like I said, it's good and bad, so it doesn't always mean it's a bad thing. So some live inside of other organisms, or they also live on top of them. So bacteria can live inside of humans, but it can also live on top of the leaves of plants and trees. And most of the bacteria that's found in humans is found in our digestive system, so in our stomach and in our intestines, because a lot of that bacteria helps break down certain foods that we eat. And something that's very important about bacteria in us and also in other plants and animals is that it plays a really important part in cycling those nutrients. So certain things that we eat, our body wants to pull those good nutrients from and store, and bacteria helps that a lot. And so bacteria is transferred how everybody usually tells you. The first thing that it does in your body once you have it is, like I said earlier, it multiplies and divides. So if you have one single cell of bacteria, it will divide into two, and then you'll have two, and then those two will also divide into two more, and then it'll just keep dividing and dividing and dividing. So something antibiotics do is stop that division and then help kill off that bad bacteria. So that's why there are certain antibiotics for certain bacteria, but also if it doesn't get fixed, like an infection that never gets cleaned properly or taken antibiotics for, it can get really, really bad. And so that's why antibiotics are used to kill off that bacteria. But also bacteria can leave you by transferring onto someone else. So if you have strep throat, for example, and you're not taking antibiotics, you coughing near someone or sharing drinks with them or coming too close with them or not washing your hands after you touch your face or anything, and then touching someone else or something else, that's how bacteria passes on to the next person. So as I've mentioned the word a few times, antibiotic, if you don't know what it is just a pill that helps stop that bacteria from multiplying, and it also helps it stop from spreading from person to person. So an antibiotic with other mixes of home remedies can usually do the trick of killing off any bacteria that you have. So again, strep throat, for example, the antibiotic that you take for strep throat, you take it a certain amount of times for 10 or however many days, and at home you make sure that you're coughing into your arm and you're not touching your face, and you're always washing your hands and making sure that you're not coming near or sharing drinks with anyone. So now that we've covered the basics of bacteria and types of bacteria and some characteristics and transfer, we're going to go ahead and talk about viruses. And so viruses are a lot more different than bacteria just because of the way that they are classified. So for example, when a virus happens or is made or passes, whatever it may be, discovered, that virus has its own name and then it holds its own name. So for example, influenza will always be the flu. That is the virus that people catch when they have the flu. Ebola is a virus that if you get it, then you only have Ebola and that's all you can have. So each one kind of is classified by its own name, and there can't be like a bunch put in there. You can't have all the viruses classified as one thing, for example. Like whereas bacteria, you had different shapes classifying them. There isn't much that's good about viruses. There's a lot of bad, but the one thing that's really, really good about viruses is that when we are young babies, if we catch a certain virus and then we kind of pass through that virus and we're okay, it is rare and you're not able to catch that virus again because your body has recognized that virus and has built immunity towards it. So for example, if you were a little kid and you got chickenpox, you'll never have chickenpox again because your body knows what chickenpox looks like and it knows how to take care of it now. But there is a lot of bad about viruses. Viruses can make us very, very sick and sometimes end up in the hospital, which is really unfortunate. But there's certain viruses that maybe you're familiar with, like the flu or the common cold, which is two things that we don't necessarily have cures for, but the flu we do have vaccines for. So if you ever hear about taking your yearly flu vaccine, that is a reason why we do that, is because it prevents us from getting the virus of the flu that year. Other kinds of viruses are respiratory infections, so any kind of infection that's usually in the lungs that classifies as a virus. And the one that you guys have all heard about recently is corona. So it is something that there is no cure for and currently no vaccine for, but once there's a vaccine for it, it'll be something that we will have to take so that nobody gets infected with corona again. So once a virus wants to come into a body, for example, it looks for something called a host cell. So we would be the host and our cells would be host cells. So this is our host cell, imagine that, and this is the virus. The virus comes into our host cell and injects its DNA, and then that cell becomes infected with the virus. And so then that cell goes to another cell and injects its DNA and then keeps kind of passing on the virus like that. So that's how viruses spread within our bodies. The spread of viruses is very similar to the spread of bacteria. A lot of stuff can be through droplets, water droplets. So your nose dripping, coughing, sneezing, stuff like that, sharing drinks, anything where like our spit is going from one person to another is a really, really fast way for both bacteria and viruses to pass from one person to another. And also things that we touch. So if we cough into our hands, or if we're talking like this and the spit is going from our mouth to our hands, and then we go ahead and touch the window and then someone comes along and touches that same spot, bacteria and viruses can also pass like that. So as I mentioned before, there is no cure for a virus. The only thing that we can do is get vaccines. So that's why when you are born, and you're usually from like the age of newborn to a few months old, you get a lot of vaccines as a baby. It's so that you don't catch a virus that leads to that specific disease or illness or whatever it may be, or sickness. So I never got chickenpox, and so I'll probably never get chickenpox, but also there's a lot of vaccines that will help things like measles or whatever it may be. So that's why we get vaccines, in order to not catch the virus. And that's why, like I said, the yearly flu vaccine is highly recommended, because if you have that vaccine, your chances of getting the flu are less likely than someone who didn't get the vaccine. It's very simple. Bacteria and viruses, we covered a lot. We covered the types, we covered how they live in a person's body and how they transfer from one person to another, so you know a little bit about the differences and the similarities between the two of them. We're going to go ahead and do the post quiz. Like I said, same questions and same answers, and I'll read them, but if you don't want them to be read, go ahead and just, on the same sheet that you did the questions already on, just write your new answer, or if your answer is still the same, write that same answer, and just kind of take a look at what you learned. So if you see a complete different change from answer number 1 in the beginning to now, then you'll know that, hey, I learned something about bacteria. So let's go ahead and jump into that post quiz. Number 1, bacteria is not able to pass from one person to another, a cell that has a nucleus, the common cold, a living organism. Number 2, viruses are A, a non-living organism that attacks the host, B, a living organism that attacks the host, C, killed with antibiotics, D, larger than bacteria. Number 3, bacteria is good and bad for humans, A, true, or B, false. Number 4, there is a cure for both bacteria and viruses, A, true, B, false. Number 5, how do bacteria and viruses go from host to host? So, transmission. And then number 6, how are bacteria and viruses different? Give 2 examples. I hope that you guys saw some growth in your pre and post quiz, because it's always nice to kind of see when you learn something, you see it on paper. So that's really awesome. And then the last thing we have for today is a project that I wanted you guys to try out at home if your teacher allows for that. We're going to be recreating models of bacteria or a virus. So you guys can go ahead and go on Google on your phones, computers, iPads, whatever it may be, and just type in a diagram of a virus or a diagram of a bacteria. And then I want you to go around the house and outside and grab a bunch of stuff and kind of recreate it, and go ahead and take a picture of it and either send it to your teacher, or you can send it to my SLU email. I have it on the board, and because I just want to kind of see what you guys came up with. I saw how creative you guys were with all your space projects, and so it would be really cool to see what you guys come up with, and how to create a diagram kind of using random stuff, rocks, paper plates, whatever it may be, whatever you find in the house. Use your creativity and make something really cool, and go ahead and send it so I can see it. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to me today. I put a lot of effort into getting bacteria and viruses ready for you guys, and so I really hope you enjoyed it. I wish I could have been there in person and we could have had a lot more fun and we could have done a lot more hands-on things, but this will have to do for now. So I really hope you enjoyed learning about viruses and bacteria, and remember to go ahead and send us your pictures of your diagrams. We're so excited to see them. Thank you guys so much, and go outside, enjoy the day.